This is a follow-up on the condenser AC repair. Took it into the shop after I got all that done and had them do a vacuum test as well as try to shoot a little Freon in it. It seemed to hold the vacuum well, but once we shot the Freon in and we took the gauges off, we actually had a leak right here at the valve. The system was already empty when I pulled the cap off before to work on it, and of course when I pulled the cap off to pump some Freon in. Not sure why it wasn't showing up before, but it was definitely leaking this last time. Took the gauges off, it was hissing quite loudly, and you could even see a little bit coming out. So they quickly put it back on, vacuumed it back down, waited till I could get this new part in, because this valve is part of the dryer. So to replace it, you're going to have to remove these two pipes that are mounted on top, and there's also another small bolt around the side that you can't see, and I believe they're all 8mm. So once we get that loose, we should be able to lower this out or take it out. But a recommendation, do not break loose the dryer from the clamp until you've got these broken loose. So we're going to go ahead and break these loose. It's at 8mm. So we got a nice long bolt on that one. And we're also going to break loose the opposite side. And once again, a nice long bolt. Now the one closer to the front of the car is a shorter bolt, as you can see there. So you don't want to mix those up. So once you get that loose, you should be able to lift that right off. And the same thing down here, should be able to give it a little wiggle. And there we go. So when you get that loose, you also want to be sure and inspect those O-rings and replace them if possible, because it's just another point of failure that's been on the car for a while. I'm going to check these against a kit that I have and see if I can replace those. So now we've got that loose, I'm going to just simply use a shorter extension because this is going to be too long. Only going to need about a couple 3-inch extension. So as I said, that is also an 8mm bolt. So you may be able to get away with not completely undoing that, which hopefully we can. I did go ahead and pull that bolt all the way out. So it looks like mine was adhered to the sticker from all the years of heating and cooling and heating and cooling. We just made that bond to the clamp. So there we go. We got our dryer out. We put some dye in it, as you can see in there. Kind of yellowy green solution. So we're going to change that out with a new one. So what I'm about to do is I've rolled up a piece of paper. I'm going to test these pipes, make sure there's nothing up in them, because this may tell me if I'm going to be having troubles later on down the road. There's a situation that's pretty well known as, I've always heard it referred to as Black Death, just like the plague, because usually that's what it is. And what you're looking for is when you pull that out, that you got a ton of black stuff on there. So mine come out pretty clean. I mean, it's got a little, and you're going to have some residue on there because the little pieces of metal and stuff from the compressor as it runs, just like anything else, transmission, engine, you're going to have wear. But if you pull it out and it's got a lot of black stuff in it, there's a good chance you're probably going to be having a compressor go out before too long. And usually when you have that situation, that means that not only are you going to be replacing your compressor, but you're probably going to wind up having to replace anything else in here as well. You may even have to replace some of your pipes to try to get all that cleaned out, because if you leave it in there, it winds up causing problems later on. But your major components, like your condenser, your evaporator inside the car, really you should probably change those as well, because they're going to have a bunch of that stuff in there. If you just change another compressor out, it's just going to take that compressor out that much quicker. Unfortunately, it's why it's known as Black Death, because usually when you find that out and you get the price of an expensive compressor, fairly expensive condenser, and a fairly expensive evaporator, including the cost of labor to put it in, it gets very pricey very, very fast. So fortunately, I'm looking pretty good, as you saw there. Everything's fairly clean. We don't have to worry about that too much. So we're going to go ahead and get our other dryer back in here once I get these O-rings checked out. So I'm going to pop off the O-rings. So I'm using a really fine screwdriver to get in back behind it. So you want to be careful not to damage them, unless you know for sure you have parts to fit. So I just get in. This is wedged, of course, around it. It's got a channel that it actually rides in. So it's kind of hard to see from here. I'll get the camera down here in a second and get you a better image. But this rides inside of a channel, so you kind of have to get in behind it like this, and then catch it, and then pop it back out around the end. Checking it out, seeing how flexible everything looks good. I'm not seeing any cracks in the O-ring. It actually seems very good. So we're actually going to continue using this one. Unfortunately, the kit I bought for this didn't really work out for the O-ring replacements, so I've been very fortunate that the O-rings have looked pretty good on everything I've looked at. So here's the smaller one. Once again, it's just a smaller O-ring on the tube that has the rubber section in it, and everything seems very flexible. There's no cracks or anything in it. I think I'm going to be able to reuse that. The kit, unfortunately, seemed to be more of a General Motors or American kit, because it came with the green O-rings that are, you know, rounded, whereas Jaguar looks like they've used much more of a flat design to their O-rings. I don't know how well y'all can tell in the camera on that, but it's got flat edges, so it's a very squared off O-ring, and that's not from just simply being in there over time. You can deform an O-ring to a degree, but not like this. So that seems to be just a design that they did for these, and it's probably because they do set in a channel, so as it goes past the opening, it's just slightly bigger than the opening, and it'll compress out. Whereas a lot of American products, they can use a straight O-ring because it just simply slides over a smooth tube with a bulge at the end of it. So as you clamp it down, that bulge pushes against the O-ring to clamp it between the item that you're bolting it to and the hose itself. So they've got a little different design here. Here's the new dryer we're going to be using. I'm not positive, I don't want to mutilate that name, but there you go. I'm sure I would destroy that name. But as you see, there's a part number, MJA7410AE-FE. It's an exact fit. It's got a new Schrader valve on it, which actually uses a metal Schrader valve. It's one of the differences between this model and the one that was on it before. It actually had like a rubber seal down off in here. This should work just fine, and we'll get it bolted in. When you're going back in, you're going to want to try to get your hoses on before you actually clamp the dryer back in place. And just kind of work the hoses around. So there you can see the O-ring in the channel that it rides in for the pin that's on the bottom of these heads that pops down into the dryer. And there's the port that it goes into. And you have a hole that's right next to the port. That's a guide for a pin. The last piece is that hole right below the port for the pin is threaded. That's of course where your bolt goes. But as for when you're putting this in, you are going to want to get your hoses hooked up first before you actually bolt the clamp back on. And that clamp has a side over here that the bolt runs through, and it just simply, as you tighten that down, this metal piece clamps around the dryer to hold it in place. So I've got those realigned. I'm going to run my bolts back down in there. Just get them snug again, those are 8mm bolts. You got the longer one on the thicker pipe, and of course the shorter one on the thinner pipe. Do not force them. They seem to bind back out because that is all aluminum, and it will not take much of anything to wind up stripping those threads out. So now that we've got those on there snug but not torqued, the dryer should be in its normal resting position. So we should be able to go ahead and run our bolt back through our clamp, get it started, and we can run it the rest of the way down with the wrench. You be careful if you're working on this right after you've driven a little ways, because these pipes of course can be hot, so can the engine. Even the AC equipment can be hot. There's quite a bit of heat that comes out right here because you do have your exhaust manifold just right down there. And there we go. It's nice and tight. Just need to torque our 2 studs here, holding these pipes on, and it's ready to go back to the shop. It's time to torque down these 2 bolts here. These bolts should be torqued down to 10 Newton meters. That works out to about 88.5 inch-pounds. That's what my wrench is, so I have to utilize inch-pounds. I'm actually going straight up to 90 because I have my extension. There's a loss there, so it'll be just fine. It should be at the proper torque. There we go. And there we go. So both of those are torqued down. We shouldn't lose anything there. And she's ready for the shop. Now I did not cover the air box on this one because I have an actual cool air induction that was on this car. I'm actually swapping back, but that's going to be in a whole nother video. There will be a separate video if you're not sure how to take this apart. You can go to that video about the air box, and I'm going to show you how it goes back in. Of course, just reverse it to take it out.